Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, lace up, or slip on your shoes, and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps.
So here I am in the season of guests. It's April 3rd. I've survived another birthday without Molly and all the things that brings with it. And in these tender moments, I'm often drawn to wanting to be with my family or people and places that make me feel safe and secure or that give me predictability, which any of you who know me know that there's no predictability in my life. So on this cloudy April 3rd, I'm sitting with my sister, Eleanor. So those of you who know me well know all about Eleanor and her existence in my life and much of our story. But for those of you new to the life of Barbara Higgins and the podcast and all of that, I am 62 almost, and Eleanor is 29
In June, I'll be 29.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. 33-year difference right there. And I brought Eleanor on for a number of reasons. A, I love her. But B, we have a million things to talk about just by virtue of our existence on the planet. I was raised the first 13 or so years of my life thinking my biological father was the person that lived with me in my house, and I found out that he was not. When I found out that Eleanor's dad and my dad, Tom, was my father, obviously that was life-changing for me. And not surprisingly, I listened to several podcasts that talk about children who find out their biological reality isn't what they thought. We have this shared father. Eleanor's reality is quite different, but as sisters, we share a unique sort of bond in that we are in the family and not in the family at the same time. Families are big, families are complex, families are real, and families are surreal. And I think probably Eleanor and I cover all of those descriptors and more quite well. I was 33 when I found out I was going to be a big sister. Again, I have Johanna. I was mostly wicked excited because I sort of knew this was a potential and something that Tom and Hannah, my stepmom, were hoping for. And so I remember I lived in my tall high-rise apartment at the time. I was married to Eric, but not really married to Eric anymore. And, my life was in throes. The first time I ever saw Eleanor, you were like 11 or 12, 13 months. I came to visit in the summer in your fancy California home and had an awesome visit. And so it began a lifetime relationship with someone that now in my current life is incredibly important. A relative for Gracie in her generation, a connection to my paternal family.
Hi, everybody. My name's Eleanor. I'm Barb's youngest sibling, and my dad was 82 when I was born. And that hook to the story of my life is probably one of my favorite things that I get to say since growing up, because I'm very proud for my parents and especially my dad. Of course, it's not the typical nuclear household of similarities between ages for the parental situation. It's actually a 44-year age gap, which is a hard pill for many people to swallow. And I can't blame them, trust me. But there's so many people in my life that were here when I was born, and I've always known them. And it's not really the same on their end. I kind of came into a space where they were already finding their ways in life and their independence and their paths forward. And then this news comes about, this 82-year-old is having a child. Why? But, I didn't ask to be born, and I'm really happy to be here. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about ageism and my experience and where I'm at in this world. So thanks, Barb, for having me.
Well, I'm excited because here's the thing. So we're mammals, right? Human beings are mammals, but what sets us apart from all other mammals, even the smart ones like dolphins and elephants and such, is that we can ponder ourselves. We can think about ourselves. The human brain is the only organ on the planet that can ponder its own existence. The brain can ponder itself as a brain. So what this does is it encourages us to ask questions. And then, of course, we question reality. And then the more we question reality, we can actually decide whether or not we think reality is real. And I think modern technology and the interwebs and AI and all of this has created a generation that spends a lot of time questioning what's real. So for me, I remember standing in line at the grocery store the summer you were born. And of course, all the tabloids back then were paper or TV shows. And there was, the National Enquirer, and there was this big story about this 82-year-old man that had a baby. And So I just grabbed it and I'm looking at it and reading it. And the cashier was like, "Isn't that crazy?" And I was like, "She's my sister." It was like the coolest thing ever. Hannah and Tom and the age difference and having parents so many years apart. My mom and Tom were also, years and years apart. My mother was 21 when I was born, and dad was 50. So that's not a small age difference. The other thing is the age difference between parent and child. So we were on the Tamron Hall show about a year ago, and the whole point of that episode was friendships and relationships that defy age. I was the 57-year-old that had a baby, and Kenny was, 64 when Jack was born. So we're grandparent age having these babies, and our relationship that was the age difference. So you have two situations in your reality. You have parents who are completely different generations. And then you come along, your mom was just under 40 when you were born, yes?
37 when I was
So
born.
37, that's how old I was when I had Gracie. All right. Love these connections. But you had the older parent, and then you had the parents that had this massive age difference. But like I do with Jack, I get up every day, we have breakfast, we go about our business, we school and work, keeping house, all of the sort of traditional things that you do being a family in America. So as different as all that is, what was like just regular about your childhood? Like, what do you remember as being no different than the people next door or across the street?
Absolutely. Everything about my childhood was normal to my truth and my perspective because that's all I ever knew. So my dad obviously retired, got to raise me most of the time while my mom, she's an amazing nurse. So she definitely was still working after I was born, and my dad was able to raise me for the majority of my childhood and into my adolescence. And those typical days, those mornings, he'd get me ready for school. He was definitely a stay-at-home dad, giving me breakfast, driving me to school. He told me stories in the car, keeping it fun and engaging. I always asked him, "Tell me about your dream last night." And whether he remembered it or there was nothing to remember, he gave me something to hold on to for the whole day.
Yeah.
So great storyteller. And then he'd pick me up from school, and a lot of our bonding moments were usually his trips to Home Depot or Lowe's, where he'd take me along because there's no way I'm staying home by myself at the age I was. So
Yeah.
it was definitely just a lot of bonding with him through his day to day and his retirement era, and getting to garden with him outside and going on walks in our neighborhood. And he was able to meet me where I was at as a kid, that he was able to help develop and raise, but I was also able to meet him where he was at, knowing that he can't run like my other friends' dads, but he can definitely sit down with me and tell me an amazing story. So that's like my typical memories of him. He passed when I was almost 15, so there's definitely no way that I can't remember him,
Right.
but my childhood is full of him raising me and all the great memories that came with it.
Yeah. Some of my most profound memories of your childhood are the fact that in his, mid to late 80s, he put you in a car and drove across the country with you. And that's not a small trip, right?
Yeah, no, so I was born in California, but by the time I turned 6, we wanted to go to the East Coast. So we moved all the way from Palm Springs, California to the other end of the country in Virginia. And that was a 5-day road trip. I have vague memories of us getting pulled over twice. But other than that, it was a great experience watching my dad hold the maps, trying to tell my mom there's just marital bickering
Yeah.
involved, and I'm sitting in the back seat asking for snacks. And it was definitely a hectic 5 days, but that's ingrained in my memory for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love it. The thought of it makes me laugh. Having spent hours driving to Florida a handful of times with Jack. God bless you. So, you tell stories of Tom, Dad, Tom, telling stories. And some of my most profound memories as a child are the same. Now, I spent 13 years, roughly the same amount of time you had him. I didn't know he was my father. So he was Uncle Tom. He was just this person in my life. But everything we did together was amazing. When I turned 10, he took me to Durham and took me to the cemetery where his family was buried, showed me the house he grew up in. We went for a lobster dinner at this wonderful restaurant at UNH. And he told me all these stories, so many stories about his childhood and this scavenger hunt they went on. And it said, "Jump, boys, jump." And I don't even remember the details of the stories, but I just remember that I was riveted. The other thing I remember a lot about our dad is that we would sing Christmas carols no matter when it was, and he would harmonize. So we'd sing the whole Christmas carol together. And then he'd say, "Okay, now cover up this ear and you just sing the Christmas carol and I'm going to harmonize." I think of those memories sometimes and how much fun the car was, and how now we get in the car with our phones and our iPads and let's keep Jack busy so he's not whiny. And, we would spend hours in the car storytelling and singing and that sort of stuff. So that similarity I love, because that's a shared experience we have with this very much older man who was unique in our lives. Another curiosity for me that I think our listeners might want to hear too is, so you're a little girl and you have this dad who's clearly old enough to be your grandfather or even your great grandfather, and you're out and about, going to Home Depot and Lowe's, going for your walks. You noted already that you could acknowledge that he couldn't run like the dads of your friends. What are some things that in your childhood that made it different, or that you remember as, I mean, not negative, because none of these things are necessarily negative, but you had this
No,
older dad. When did those things come up?
I want to, just make it known that the things that people don't know, they don't know. And there's going to be a lot of cognitive protection for someone who can't really comprehend something that's different, in this case, an age difference such as this. So a lot of biases and judgments came out of other people's mouths before they could come to a place of curiosity rather than said judgment. So examples of this, it kind of started early when folks would mention, "Oh, you have a very beautiful granddaughter." And he was definitely not one to just let the story go on in the way that someone else was perceiving it, but he would always correct whoever mentioned that assumption and just say, like, "No, this is my daughter, like, I'm her father." I would always stick up with him, like, "Yeah, this is my dad," just completely proud, and obviously knowing that, yeah, you're my dad and not my grandfather, but I'll definitely take you to Grandparents' Day and you can pretend to be my grandfather.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it was kind of silly and a little hypocritical, but any opportunity to bring dad to school, even on Grandparents' Day, we did. And then as I got older and stayed in private school for a little bit longer, there were more judgments from kids and possibly their families, implicating a little more judgment onto them, letting me know that your dad's going to die soon and you're going to hell because your dad had you this way and this isn't right. Why would, you know, your parents do this, bring you into the world knowing that he's going to leave soon? And I can't blame people for not understanding and not knowing, but I can definitely hold them accountable for saying the things that they did and how it impacted my perception of, am I meant to be here?
Right.
Kind of my truth and my purpose. And that kind of made it a little bit tricky to follow a path that felt purposeful in
Right.
my own sense,
Right.
especially watching their words kind of be correct in a way as he did get older. Now, he didn't pass overnight in any way, but as an elderly father, he passed just before his 97th birthday, and it was years of aging and getting to that point.
Right, I
So all of
remember.
those things definitely had a toll on my development.
Yeah. Well, you're from a very young age, you learn that you need to be vigilant. Yeah, all this undercurrent. So I worry about this with Jack, and I'm going to bring Jack into this now and again because I listen to you, and it's like note taking on how to ease Jack's mind and ease his heart a bit. Now, in current times, the number of grandparents raising their grandchildren has quintupled with the drug addictions and a lot of the homelessness and a lot of the families all living together. So I get that all the time. They often say granddaughter, that long, beautiful hair, but oh, your grandchild is beautiful. And I'll say, no, 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 he's my son. And they look at me funny. And I'm like, so I always sort of have to humor it. No, well, I'm that crazy lady that had a baby at 57. And some people will say, yeah, that is crazy. What were you thinking? And I just look at Jack like, I guess I was thinking this. I don't know. But there are those that will say that to me as well. How selfish. She's going to be changing your diapers and blah, blah, blah. And when I look at our family, so Martha is 80 now, perhaps. I think she might have hit 80 by now, and traveling the world and owning more than one home and mobile and with it and super healthy. Our dad lived almost to be 97, no, 98, right? Which
No,
before
just
was,
short of his 97th
yeah,
birthday.
so 96 turning 97. His sister Barbara, same. The longevity on that side of the family is extraordinarily long. Then I look at my maternal side of the family, my mom. Her mom and dad both lived well into their 90s. She's super healthy for 82. So I don't look at myself as Jack's going to be 10 when I die. If I get hit by a bus when he's 10, then yes. But in terms of that being a decision maker for me to have a baby, I don't. I look at those comments as their own insecurities and their own judgments, and I don't live inside someone's head. It's hard though. Sometimes I cling to the negatives. There can be 50 positive comments, and what I remember is the criticism. But we have the same thing. Kenny's the same way. They think it's his grandson. He's a bit more humorous about it. Although when we were doing all the media stuff around Jack's birth, I thought of you guys all the time because in a very different, the internet didn't exist, but your parents got a ton of publicity and some of it was great and some of it wasn't great. I actually remember a story when you were maybe 3 or 4 or 5. You were still living in California because you were here for a visit. And the Concord Monitor came and did this whole interview and they took all these pictures of you in my living room on the big white couch. And even still, I remember that article came out and it was even the press coverage could be judgy sometimes. And it's just like, what? Why put opinion in there? Just here's this amazing family that defies acceptable norms of age and whatever. It's a piece of it. I mean, I guess we go into it knowing that people are going to feel this way, but it doesn't necessarily make it feel better. Ageism. I'm now over 60, which means I'm, by all intents and purposes, an older person. People often refer to me as a boomer. I was born at the tail end of the baby boomer generation, which was a huge chunk of years. It was like from the 40s to the 60s. I look at my mom and dad as true baby boomers. Tom was the greatest generation, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, 1913. Oftentimes I'll get insulted. Okay, boomer is kind of a funny, like, let's make fun of old people because they don't know anything. Now, I think that's probably endemic of every generation in the history of generations. We look to people older than us as, stupid or feeble or not adept or able or whatever. But I do notice as someone who's now almost 62, old enough to collect the socials, right? I can retire legally, I can collect retirement. When I was your age, this seemed impossibly old to me. My Grammy and Grampy Higgins, so Mr. Higgins's parents, they died at 62 and 64, and that did not seem young to me at the time. Yes, I knew it was young, but they were old people, over a certain age. And now that I'm that age, I don't feel that way at all. And I think that might be true for a lot of people. Clearly, there was a lot about your dad, our dad, that didn't feel 82. I came home from college and, after being gone for like 8 years, and one of the first things I did was spend a weekend with him at Happy Valley, and we skied Cannon in like 20 below weather with leather face masks. And if I was 22, he was 72. So he's in his 70s. So clearly, I'm 10 years away from that. So in 10 years from now, if I take after dad, then I'm going to be skiing Cannon on a 20 below zero day just fine. And he did ski just fine. I had a hard time keeping up, which used to piss me off a little bit. Ageism. What I notice for me is that there's a very much, politically speaking, a negative connotation to older people. And sometimes I can see it in outdated practices and unwillingness to be flexible on ideas and things. But now that I'm in this generation, now that I'm older, I also see like wanting to hold on to what makes sense, right? So a lot of what we look at and judge, the person in the grocery store that sees you with Tom and says, oh, that's, what am I looking at here? Or when I'm breastfeeding Jack at Disney, this group of women walk by like,
what am I looking at here?
Yes. And this is so wrong. When you think about it, you think of a nursing mother, some young, voluptuous 25-year-old with a little infant on her breast, right? We make it fit. It's all pretty and packaged. And how do you see having a dad 82 years older than you?
I think one thing from my experience and upbringing and being able to develop the level of empathy I have for folks of all experiences and walks of life, specifically honed in on age. I know that it takes a lot of patience and understanding to meet someone where they're at. And that can be easier when we can connect with folks that we find similarities with. A lot of that, when we judge books by their cover, happens to be age and basically what we look like on the outside. I believe one of humans' first emotions was fear, and understanding that as a protection mechanism to bring who we know that's going to be supportive into our group and who's going to be excluded and be harmful into our group. And so something as abnormal as an elderly father or elderly parent nurturing and taking care of someone under the age of 18 can be something that is feared by others because they don't understand. It's tough when I see ageism play throughout my day-to-day. I understand that my mom is 1 month away from retirement and she's super excited. And she is the nurse with the most experience on her floor. And yet the nurses that are younger than I am are not letting them into her circle, not wanting to get to know her for who she is, but rather take advantage of the experience and skills that she has.
Right.
So leaving things for her to do or not being able to leave a seat for her at the lunch table. Like it sounds so juvenile, but truly people are always excluding folks. And I know we talk about love is love movements for folks that, want to be able to explore connection and relationship building. And I think ageism isn't talked enough about that because we do, as a society, put ourselves in boxes and put people who are continuing on into the world in
Right.
boxes because they no longer serve the box that we think that they do.
Right.
And that, for me, is the thing that we really need to dismantle when it comes to ageism, because everybody knows something you don't. So you don't need to be offended by someone who is older than you
Right.
or different than you, with giving them the chance just to connect, because there's going to be so many similarities that you can come across if you just
Right.
give the time to connect with them.
Right. Exactly. I think there's also an assumption too with younger generations is, growing up in an internet generation where information is right here and you learn right away, you're born sometimes with the knowledge of how to access it quickly. I know oftentimes when I'm criticized for my age or put into a box because I'm older, it's because the assumption is, well, you're old, so you wouldn't know how to do this. Technology is a great example. There are times I am befuddled, technologically speaking. A lot of how to get more people to look at my Instagram page, like all of these kinds of things, because that wasn't ingrained in me growing up. I wasn't constantly posting and doing all this stuff. So it's a new behavior for me. But what happens sometimes is and I think this probably happens to your mom, along with all the things that you didn't learn the same way that young people learn now or younger people, you have a lifetime of experience. I was having a conversation with somebody. Well, I sit on a school board, and one of the school board members once made a Facebook post saying, old white people with money need to stop talking. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm old and I'm white and I have money, so I should stop talking. And I know what she meant, but when these comments are made, I actually, at a later school board meeting, called this woman out when she made a comment in the meeting and it was on TV. And I'm like, oh, a little ageism there, I think. We need to be careful about that. And then she sort of caught herself. But I think what happens is it's easy for us as well. This goes back to people judging what they see without knowing our stories. But if it's what's in our comfort zone, then it's okay. Like the point she was making was that we needed more diversity in the decision-making process. And she's right. But to tell old white people with money to stop talking isn't the best way to go about it, because what you're doing is you're just discriminating, just like you claim you don't want. To me, it's the same behavior the other way around. And it's just such a huge balance. And I know with Tom as a dad, there were certain political things that he and I were never going to agree on. He grew up in a generation where you forewent college and marriage and family to go voluntarily fight in a war. And you spent years of your life living for the good of your country, not for yourself at all. I mean, we have tons of people that join the military now, but it was a much more generational decision. Everybody did it. So there were times when I would just sort of listen out of deference to his age and experience, even though inside I was like, oh, okay. Do you have any memories around that kind of those kinds
Oh,
of things?
yeah, definitely. I think one of my first memories where dad and I had a disagreement was probably when I started playing with the boy from across the street. We were the same age, just making friends as, someone 8 or 9 at the time. And my dad didn't like him for the sole reason that he was black. And that was a huge indicator for me that even at the age that I was trying to comprehend, how can you discriminate? I didn't know what that word meant at the time, but how can you not like somebody just on based on how they look?
Right.
How I can't comprehend that.
Right.
And having that conversation with him at that age and seeing his dismay and his stubbornness to be like, well, this is just how I believe and this is just what I think. I'm very thankful to have my mom as the mediator for situations like those, because she was able to provide compassion for both sides, not saying that both sides were right,
Right.
but the level of patience and compassion that is needed for folks to be understood while not being agreed with. I think
Yes.
that's
Yes.
definitely important too.
Yes.
That was my first argument that I had with him.
I remember
And
those conversations.
yeah,
And he had his ideas. My most stark memory like that wasn't with him directly. It was my Grammy Higgins. I invited a cross country teammate to Thanksgiving who was black. She told me that she couldn't do it. She couldn't have her in the house. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to believe this way, but I do. And it's not something I'm hosting Thanksgiving and I get to make this decision. I didn't speak to her for a couple of years. I just couldn't same thing. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And I was never going to bring my friend to be subjected to that kind of racism. Dad had those beliefs. how do you judge those? People have those beliefs around women. I think dad was better that way. He wanted us all educated, but there was definitely roles and behaviors that we were supposed to fit into as daughters that were in some ways probably easier to be dad's daughter than dad's son. You grow up with your generation and what you think and feel and moving in and out of those beliefs. And again, when you think of why those beliefs existed in the first place, I think it all comes back to fear and being afraid. The other piece for me is family. So you were born in a married situation, planned pregnancy, all of the normal things. I was an affair baby, conceived in secret. And then, DNA testing wasn't what it is now. So I was, raised as a Higgins, even though I was a Ritzman, and didn't find out anything different until my teenage years, where my parents had a separation and a divorce, and there was a lot of trauma and tumultuous stuff going on. And my mother thought it would make me feel better if I knew that, biologically speaking, my abusive Higgins dad wasn't my dad, which made no difference at all. It just made me feel like I shouldn't feel as bad as I do. Oh, somehow this isn't so bad because I'm not related to him. Like, it was bizarre. But family piece. So I was charged with keeping my biological identity a secret. I knew that Jonathan was also Tom's, so I had one full sibling. Johanna remained a mystery for a long time, and that's just the reality. I've told the story a lot, so I'm not divulging information that my listeners haven't heard. But it was my job to keep it secret, and that weighed on me heavily as I went through. I think one of the hardest things for me growing up was the secrets. I had both parents telling me to keep things secret that they were doing, and that weighed heavy on me. Fast forward to your arrival, and that was right around the time you were coming into the world, is what sort of precipitated our big sister Martha to decide, you know what, it's stupid that we don't know one another. So you kind of brought us together, which is not a bad thing, right? It actually makes me pretty happy. My relationship to my paternal side has been rocky because I was conceived in a relationship that was an affair during a time when dad was married to someone else and, had an intact family that I wasn't a part of. I have to say, for the most part, I've never ever felt unwelcome. Family wise, I often feel like, well, like the ugly stepsister or, whatever I am, and not through any fault of anyone. My older siblings are not bad people, but, they were walking around with a reality that now is turned upside down. And then comes you, right? When you think of family, what is that like for you? Like, how do you feel in terms of being a part of the family, and what's uncomfortable for you or
Mm,
comfortable?
yeah, that's a good question. So I was born in California. The neighborhood that I lived in with my mom and my dad, we shared with my mom's mom, so my grandmother, in addition to my mom's two sisters and their families. And we were all in the same neighborhood. And I got to hang out a lot with my cousins on my mom's side. And that was my childhood up until I was 6 of traditional familial connection. I loved that. I loved being able to run across the park from my house to go visit my grandma. And I loved being able to hang out with my cousins, Rachel and Mariah, who were in their teens,
Yeah. Oh, so big and important to you.
I know, definitely. And I looked up to them. That's all I knew at the time. And then when we moved across the country to Virginia, I kind of only had my mom and dad at that point. And this was me 6 going into 7. So I'm developing my own identity. I'm developing my own purposes and what fulfills me as a kid, but I'm also trying to find a fit, and where do I fit in this grand scheme of family and society and purpose. And for me, that got trickier as I got older. I remember the ideas of you and Martha and getting to meet you when I was younger via the trips that dad and I took. But at the same time, me being back at home, I wanted to still stay connected with my family, even though my family was entering into their adulthood in their own situations. I got to see a lot of my friends in school spend time with their siblings who were
Yeah.
close in age, and that made me long for a connection like that, but it wasn't the way that their experiences were at all. So I think I had a lot of voids I was trying to fill
Yep.
when it came to those connections because I wanted to be able to relate to Martha and Jeff and PJ and you and Jonathan. And even Jonathan, my half brother, your full brother, Jonathan, I remember meeting him maybe when I was closer to 10. And his sole reason coming to visit our house was to ask my dad's hand in marriage. ask my
Ask
dad for his
permission. Yeah.
blessing.
Yeah.
Ask for his blessing. It wasn't to visit me or get to know me or connect with me, but I was just all about Jonathan that day. I just remember wanting to know more about him, just wanting to know who he was, knowing that I was his sister. And that took him by surprise. I remember that. But I also know that kind of developing more into my adolescence, especially after dad passing, I think that was a moment where I was able to connect with my other sides in my paternal family and know who these people are. Because really, it was just my dad who was the center of that universe. And when he passed, that's all I wanted to hold on to. So I took it upon myself to ask my mom to send me up on airplane trips to visit family in New England and connect and grieve and understand and question. But, it takes two. And I tried my best to meet people where they're at, but sometimes it's not reciprocated. So
No.
definitely a struggle to define family for me, but
Yeah.
that's where I'm at now.
Well, and I feel the same way. I mean, I know for Jonathan, I'm the one that ended up telling him about his paternal reality. He was not surprised by it. He grew up thinking that he and Johanna were his, not me. There was just Concord's a small town and the rumors and such. But he also, and he knew that now that he and I knew, but Norm didn't, like now we have this secret and that's not right. And that was sort of my mother's unwillingness to have the guts to be honest. And again, I might sound hypercritical of her because I do feel as a mother, she's the one that made these decisions. They were her stories to tell. And you either don't tell it or you tell the whole story. You can't parcel out what's convenient. And so, again, even letting Norm know that I wasn't his biological daughter, I had to do that. My mother was sitting right there, but when the time came to tell, she couldn't do it. So, Jonathan, he's very defensive, which I can see sometimes with our older siblings. They hold on to this reality of what their family is supposed to be. And now it's upside down. And what do we do with that? And I know in my dynamic, Jonathan feels like it's always all about what I want. That's how he feels. Does it put a strain on our relationship? Absolutely. We don't see a lot of one another. We're fine, but we're fine. Like, are you upset? No, I'm fine. That kind of like, and we are, if when I need him, he's right here and we come together and do well. But I do know that we are a family, biologically and genetically speaking, and we all have very different realities of growing up and who our parent figures were and what we thought family meant. And then we're sort of thrown together in this big cauldron, so to speak, to try to be a family together. It's not always easy. I often feel like I'm on the outside looking in. And I think it's because I am sometimes on the outside looking in. But I can't frame my entire existence around that either. And I know I'm sort of rambling back and forth, but that's kind of how our reality is. There are times when it's just fine and times when I try to understand it from someone else's perspective. And then times where I just want to throw my hands up in the air, you
Oh,
know.
absolutely. No, all validated in the sense of when you see it from like three steps back and you see yourself beyond third person,
Yes.
what the heck is this circus?
Yeah, exactly.
Truly, like I can empathize with that perspective as well. But what I ask for as people navigate uncertainties with the way that people live their lives is just a level of compassion.
Yeah.
In no way am I validating anything violent towards another person or individual, but you can't hold someone accountable who didn't ask to be brought into this
Correct.
world. And I think what you could do instead is just get to know them for who they are as a person
Yeah.
first. And you can learn a lot more from where they are
Yeah.
because there's just so much experience, so much trauma, so much development,
Yeah.
and so much that has shocked my nervous system from this experience.
Hmm.
But not just my nervous system, it's your nervous system, it's Martha's nervous system, it's Tom's nervous system, it's my mom's. It all comes combined, and we see ourselves in each other every day, which is beautiful, and I love that. But there's also that outside looking in piece that I feel quite often
Yeah.
because we came around and our news was shared in a way that people couldn't digest it as easily as
Right.
others can when there is a baby announcement.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to continue the age issue in our lives, so you have two sisters. One is old enough to be your mother, and one is old enough to be your grandmother. And yet we're siblings. We have the same dad. So we're the same generation, except we're three completely different generations. We have a very definite baby boomer, and we have a very definite Gen Xer, and then we have a very definite millennial. Are you a millennial? What are you?
90, 96 is tricky. It's on the end of millennial, beginning of Gen Z. So I relate more to Gen Z.
Yeah, see, that's me with Boomer Gen X,
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, very, very different generational philosophies and political realities. And I remember having a talk once with one of our older siblings, and we were having this conversation, and I was sort of apologetic, like, I'm sorry, like that I exist or whatever. The response was, and it was to you and to me, and the fact that we were created obviously out of love and purpose and all this, and that they wondered if they were just created because that's what you were supposed to do. That based on how unhappy Tom's marriage was and how stressful their childhood was in terms of watching their parents hate each other and know the reality that their dad was out and about quite a bit, just revel in the fact that you were brought here because you were wanted. And that was such a telling response from where that person was coming from, that no wonder it's hard to look at me, not because I'm some illicit love child, but because I'm a child of love in a way that they didn't feel they were. It opened my eyes to what their childhood must have been like, the hard parts of it, and the expectations based on being raised in the 40s and the 50s, and how hard that must have been. But I look at my like friends I have that follow all the rules. You have the parents in their 20s, and then when those parents in their late 40s, their kids have their babies. And then when they're in the late 60s, their kids have their babies. So you're a parent in your 20s, and you're a grandparent in your 40s or 50s, and you're a great grandparent in your 60s or 70s, and it all fits. And I have no understanding of what what any of that feels like.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. I see my 10-year high school reunion coming up in a few months, and half of my friends that I went to school with have their families already started. And I don't know when I want to do that, if I want to do that. And I don't know how one can make a decision such as that. But,
yeah. Oh, at
you
your
know,
age, me either. I was never going to have kids. So you're following along in the family footsteps, right? Doing
yeah.
exactly what you're supposed to do, which is ponder. So the next piece for me in my own reality, I have Gracie and Molly. So they have three siblings, but again, much older. Katie's the youngest of Kenny's older kids, and she was 14 when Gracie was born and 15 or 16 when Molly was born. So, high school freshman, high school junior, I think they were. That wasn't a real sibling relationship. It was more like an aunt niece, kind of relationship age wise. So I have Gracie and Molly, and they're little. And on their dad's side, they have no relatives their age because Katie and Davy and Kenny grew up with Kenny's siblings. They all had their kids at the same time. Like for every Banzoff kid, there's another Banzoff and an Ove kid that are born the same year. So when you look at pictures, there's like, 9, 10 kids, and they all have someone their age, and the summer vacations and Christmas and Thanksgiving, and which family do we go to? And then Kenny's first wife's family is the same. 4 daughters. They all have their babies at the same time, 9 million cousins. And so just this really sort of quote unquote normal reality. And then I have Gracie and Molly. Now, lucky for me, my family, now let me be clear. So there's me, and then my cousin James, he had 2 sons right when I had Gracie and Molly. So there's cousins. But then my uncle Walty, because he's my mother's younger brother, but he's younger than me. So he and Christine have 2 kids, but they're not cousins. They're actually Molly and Gracie's uncles because their dad is my uncle, right? So it's like this weird, we just all say we're cousins, but having a family of kids the same age to connect with as family was really important to me. So Christmases, and we always had a family party here in the summer. Those memories were very important for me. I remember you came over Christmas one year, and then you came in the summer one year. And what I loved was you were enough older than Gracie and Molly that they would look up to you and you were like, the cool, ooh, Eleanor is coming, like you were older, but you weren't older. But fast forward to Molly's death. And now I'm really looking at the fact that my family is very, very much dissipated. Those cousins are far and wide. We don't spend a ton of time together as a family. Gracie's person, which was her counterpart, her partner in crime, is gone. Kenny's family, none of his kids have had kids yet. He only has, 2 great nieces or great nephews. You know what I mean? Like there's no relatives her age. And so you came up at the time of Molly's death, and it became really obvious to me that you and Gracie could be for each other what you both desperately needed. And as I've watched that cultivate, it just gives me such relief. I mean, she's your niece, but she's like a sibling, she's like a cousin. When I put that together for you, what goes through your heart and your mind, and how is that? I mean, it's emotional stuff, but
No, I think going back to first visiting, I remember when Gracie was born, and I remember when Molly was born. I remember dad taking us up there to visit. And I remember as I was able to like start exploring the internet and gaining Facebook and still feeling like I can hold on to these connections that I can't physically obtain myself because I'm too young to fly by myself, but seeing what I can see on the internet and seeing Molly and Gracie grow up together. It was kind of what I was longing for in my own sense. So, developing those connections through friendships at school and in the neighborhood and things like that. As I got older, and it was my freshman year of college, 2016, when Molly passed. So, by that time, I was able to kind of cultivate my social circle and my group. And that was like my crutch to fill that void. And I talk about voids because losing a parent, it takes a big set of shoes to fill when you're trying to fill that empty
Right.
space. I'll keep referring to voids
Yeah.
because I
No, I
have
get it.
some.
Oh, no, I get it.
So, knowing that the impact of the loss and grief that Gracie was going through just about 5 years after I had lost a paternal figure in my life, there was a level of connection that I could provide to her. And I felt like that was my purpose at that time. And since then, it's been something that's definitely on the back burner. Like, we don't always have to talk about our dead relatives and the impact they have on us, but more so, it's kind of just how we eat, breathe, and navigate through life. Like, I can bring up my dad at any point, she can bring up Molly at any point, and it's just of space for us to hear one another and
Yes.
hold one another and look at one another that neither of us could have possibly had otherwise in someone else. There's so many things that happen in what someone's experience that someone isn't expecting. I could definitely expect my father leaving Earth at one point in time, although I didn't want to believe it. But Gracie couldn't expect what happened to Molly, and
No.
none of us really could have. So there's definitely differences there. I'll never know what it's like to lose someone as close as a sister that you knew all your life. And she'll never know up until she does the point of what it's like to lose a parent.
Right.
So it's just the shared compassion that we can have for one another and being able to connect deeper than a stereotypical aunt and niece level. Like, I really used to put my hands on my hips and be proud to be an aunt or a great aunt to someone who's probably older than I am.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's just how our family works.
Yeah.
But at this point, it's kind of beyond the labels of that, and it's just the Gracie Eleanor relationship that we have that I'm truly grateful for because I really don't know how else I would have processed and vice versa. I remember going to school the Monday that my dad passed, or well, he passed on a Saturday, and I went to school that Monday because I didn't know what to do. I didn't have what I could have had in that time to grieve. And I think that Gracie and I and the relationship that we've developed has definitely healed both of us in ways that I couldn't imagine
Yes.
otherwise, her not being here.
Yeah. Oh, and I won't speak for Gracie, but I can observe, we have our conversations and there's an element of relief in her. So much of her loss was she lost her person, and nobody will ever be Molly. But as we talked about at breakfast the other day, we look for people that remind us of our people. And we try to recreate the feelings and the realities of those people that made us comfortable. So when we choose friends or partners or, whatever, oftentimes we're drawn to people that have characteristics of those that we knew and loved. But it's been heavy on Gracie to not have somebody that can just willingly accept and understand her, which family is supposed to be that way. It doesn't mean it always is. And just having a relative that's her age that looks like her, that, in 5 years difference in age is nothing when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s. It's nothing. Kenny and I are 8 years apart, and I don't feel 8 years younger than Kenny. We're old enough now that we're just the same age. When I was 8 and he was 16, well, yeah, that's a little creepy. But I know one thing when people say crap like everything happens for a reason, I don't believe everything happens for a reason. I think everything happens for a multitude of reasons that change and flow all the time. And some things happen that should never have happened. But when I look at you coming into my life and reshaping the word family for me one more time, and all that it got me ready for with having Gracie and Molly and then losing Molly, I can sometimes from the top of the mountain notice the topography of the valley, and it makes more sense than it does when you're in the middle of the valley because you can see all those connections. Whatever is true about where Molly is or how connected she is to all of us, I am quite sure that there is a measure of relief on her end, that you two have one another, because, well, I just think that would bring her comfort. It brings me comfort. The other family piece for me on my end is even my dad, when I say my dad, Mr. Higgins' dad, when you know the reality of life, Molly and Gracie loved you so much. And I remember being nervous with Norm about, is this gonna like offend you or kick you in the face and all this and that. And he was spiritual enough and, sorry enough for his own transgressions in life to understand that his judgment was not necessary or even okay. That what was the most important thing was to be loving. And he simply said, she's a beautiful person. She deserves to be here. None of her existence has anything to do with choices she made. And Molly and Gracie love her. And so she's family. Given how angry he could have stayed at my mother and how angry I'm sure he was at Tom, that had nothing to do with you, which was a huge lesson for me in forgiveness, in letting go, in acceptance, in empathy, and seeing things from the other side. But I know my mom loves when you're here, and I think it's twofold. I think you remind her of someone that she was desperately in love with, which was our dad. Even just saying your name brings my mom back to a time in her life where she had moments of really happiness and comfort and felt taken care of and wanted and that sort of thing. But isn't it funny the responsibilities we're born with, right? Like,
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of guilt that people can feel later down the line when it comes to those responsibilities and indications of how much someone has to hold on to. So, like for me, and knowing my entire upbringing, totally not typical and whatsoever, knowing that I'm named after someone who is a completely different person than I am, but someone that definitely wanted to belong to bring back into this world again by honoring them through their name.
yeah,
And I think another cool thing about this is for me personally, I don't feel like this responsibility that folks may think that I have, whether it's there or not, it doesn't weigh me down in any way. It's something that brings me part of that purpose, knowing that, like, okay, whether or not the miracle baby that I am is meant to be here or not, I am. And I'm still here
yeah,
and I'm still able to do great work and create and bring joy and understand sadness and differences. And I think another person that I think about with responsibility similar to mine is Jack. And knowing that Jack came into this world to, like I mentioned earlier, in some way fill a void of
yeah,
some kind. And although that responsibility right now, when we're talking about him and he's 4, it sounds like, oh, what is he going to do when he's older? And I remember so many people worrying about me. What am I going to do when I'm older? And we're going to be just fine.
yeah,
That's the best thing about it. I think it really gives us a level of resiliency, a level of connection to be
yeah,
able to understand folks and their differences because that's our entire upbringing. We have limited space to judge. So I know that some folks can kind of get psyched out about that responsibility that you're putting on someone else and what that looks like. But if you're able to help support them and guide them through their questions and curiosities and worries, that responsibility doesn't become something super heavy on them. Rather, it gives them purpose
right,
and breath. So
right,
I do appreciate that. But my perspective is I don't feel weighed down on anything.
yeah.
I know that navigating the world can be tricky from my shoes. I'm glad to be here nonetheless.
Well,
So,
you are here, which in my mind means you were supposed to be here, Yeah, I mean, your pregnancy was your mom's pregnancy with you was definitely, a miraculous sort of thing. You're intelligent and smart and healthy and successful and alive and normal and well, and you were made with 82-year-old sperm. Like there it is. And Jack is smart and intelligent and healthy and well and will be successful one day, I'm sure, in however he wishes to define it. And he was grown in the belly of a 57-year-old, right? Inappropriate DNA, right? Based on what life thinks, right? So he's a miracle too. And, I think it makes us rethink the judgments and expectations we put on people. Now you're adult Eleanor, right? You're your own person, grown up Eleanor. So being who you are, the things that you like, ways that you see yourself, things you'd like to do, what's all that like for you? Both as just a regular schmo who's going to be 29 and as you.
yeah. Aside from profession and hobbies and interests, I think just what I've done for myself and the peace that I've been able to give myself since losing my dad and since losing Molly and still trying to hone in on who I am as an individual, no matter how many people told me otherwise based on my upbringing. I think for me, the piece that I've been able to grant myself is that space of authenticity and allowing myself to be Eleanor Rose. There is no one like me. There is no one meaner than me. And I think that is my biggest prized possession, is just being able to celebrate who I am as an individual.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always like that. I think so many people's judgments had gotten in the way and clouded my own path of where I want to be, past the labels of daughter, past the labels of sister, but just Eleanor. And what does that look like? I fulfill where is needed. I have my hobbies, my interests. I like educating. I like storytelling. I love documenting. Like, those are my pieces. I hoard experiences and I hoard memories and nostalgia. I think a lot of that has to do with my upbringing, but it's definitely something that I like to capture. But with that, I just love also giving people the space at the table to share their stories and their experiences, because I have a cool story to bring to the potluck, but someone else's dish is going to be so good when I'm able to hear it too.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
so I like being able to pay that forward, being able to provide those spaces for individuals, even when I'm in my own, space to talk about my experience. A lot of it has been through my work in higher education. So when we discuss inclusion and equity and pieces like that, no one really talks about age until it gets to be my turn to bring up the module and my hour starts then. That is also a reminder to myself that not everyone is going to be able to digest a story such as that one. And that's okay. I think that keeps me strong. I think it maintains my grit to know that I can understand people's differences and keep it moving, because I come from a level of compassion where this is where they're at. This is all they know. I brought this new information into their space and they're going to sit with it and navigate them the best that they can.
Right.
So ball's in their court at that point. Yeah, I just think being able to keep myself happy, keep myself lifted. It's definitely tricky here and there. You're not fully healed after so much loss and navigating that piece, but you're also able to build your own sense of strength through what fulfills you. So for me, that is my creative spirit, and connecting with my pets and animals and my friends and family. I think for me, just that's what brings me joy and purpose in life right now. So I can't wait to see what the next 30 years brings. I know I'm 1/3 of the way of being 90. And so Dad reached it. You're going to reach it.
I'm 2/3 of the way.
I know. Yeah, that's just where I'm at.
Yeah. It's important for me to let people know that another amazing quality you have is the ability to see things. And I remember one time when you came up to visit, you had a camera with you and we were talking about finding passions. And because you were wondering why Gracie and Molly spent so much time dancing. And I'm like, well, they're passionate about it. And you pondered this for a minute, like, passionate? I wonder what my passions are. And I'm like, photography. And one of my favorite memories is we're at a lake and you looked up and there was some sort of hawk or bird of prey flying. You went, oh, and you just picked up the camera, went click and put it down. And it was this unbelievably stunning picture. Like, you captured it. Now, granted, some of that was just luck. You happened to click just in time, but I could have picked up a camera and gone click and I wouldn't have gotten that picture. You know what I mean? Like, and sometimes I think photography is not so much about the manipulation of the camera, but your eye is the lens. So the camera is an extension of what you see, not what the camera sees that you happen to focus on. Tell me a little bit about what you see when you look through a camera lens.
Oh,
And how that
absolutely.
makes you a storyteller.
Well, my camera is a tool. It's definitely not a piece of fine china. And I get a lot of eye rolls when I say that, because it is expensive equipment. My goodness. Like, to make sure you have all the right components to capture a piece of visual art is important. But I'm going to sling that piece of equipment around to make sure that I get the art that I want.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's just being able to, I need to take my own advice when I say this, but activate presence and being able to find a space to be present in that moment. I'm navigating definitely a year of trials and tribulations right now as I move through transition. But for me, when I'm able to be kind of in a moment of time and I can just observe, I think being an observer is a great and powerful tool alongside visual storytelling, because you're taking in everything that no one else may be paying attention to.
Right.
But people, places, nature, landscape, that's all I love documenting. And I like capturing those moments in time. I think another piece of me that holds on to capturing moments in time are things that I didn't get to do with people that I really wanted to, such as document more experiences with my dad. Like I have pictures that other people have taken where I can, remember those moments. But I remember getting my first iPhone when I was like 10 or so, maybe 11. It was the iPhone 3 and it had just come out. I begged my mom because I was in middle school and she got me the iPhone. I remember, wanting to try to take pictures of my dad, and there wasn't like a selfie option yet. And, you're trying to use your hands and navigate that piece. And definitely taking a selfie on an iPhone was just a challenge at that time. I think not being able to take enough photos with my dad or Molly, the opportunities that I got to visit are opportunities that I take now to document every piece that I want.
Yeah.
When in doubt, I take a photo. When in doubt, I record the moment. And whether or not that be selfish in my own visual documenting, like it's my stories that I like to capture and I like to hold on to them and I'll share them with the world. But that's just what fulfills me, is being able to tell other people's stories, but in a way that's also telling my own story.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm like you, it's just so easy to capture it now. Why wouldn't you? This morning I'm cooking bacon and I've got the phone on selfie mode and Jack's behind me singing along to Five Nights at Freddy's as he eats his bacon. They're so cute. I'm like, what? This isn't even something I would have thought of documenting years ago, and there are times when I feel like I should pick up my phone and I don't, because I don't want to let go of the moment. I look at our family and it's easy to feel like, okay, I got some good genetics for me going here, which is a wonderful thing. But at the end of the day, when you brush your teeth, and if you brush your teeth every night, sometimes I forget, there you go. But you get in bed and you turn the light off, none of that really matters, right? Like when you close your eyes to go to sleep, it's the Barb of Barb or the Eleanor of Eleanor, and whatever might circle around at that time, that's the most important piece. I don't know. It's
No,
just,
you're right. I see it as when I was born, I was part of so many other people's stories that when I'm able to develop my own sense of agency and finally focus on my story and what does that look like, especially when you're going to bed at night and you close your eyes and it's just back to you. And it's like you're in a room with everyone that you've ever known and all the people that you get to love and meet in your life. But then you close your eyes and you're born with yourself and you die with yourself, is
yes,
what I like to tell myself quite
yes,
often. So
yes,
that's what we can take care of,
yeah,
and that's what we have agency over, is
yes.
our own selves and what that looks like as we project into the world.
I'm in the stage of life now where you have regret and remorse. You look back and wish you'd done things differently. Little by little, everyone you knew is disappearing. And what's that like? And I have times now, and I've had them my whole life. And I think part of that comes from I only have one full sibling. In all of my siblings, only one of us share a mom and a dad. And there's nothing normal about that relationship. So oftentimes my, on the outside looking in, comes from the fact that so much of my life has me different than the people I'm around. I'm this amazing runner, but I have this massive asthma that creates both a miraculous, wow, you ran that fast with asthma. And I never got very good because I couldn't get beyond the asthma, like, so I always have these elements of myself that make me a bit different. But I know in this phase of my life, I start to feel lonely, like people I knew are slowly disappearing. And, the Concord that I grew up with, when you live in the place you grew up, you remember what it was like. And there are people that have no idea it was ever any different. And the letting go. My friend Bethany, who is 38, both of her parents are gone. And she said to me one day, you're like the only person that knew me when I was 6. Like no one else in my life knew me then, and how hard that was for her. And I look at you and I, with so much of our family, biological family on our dad's side, is so much older than us. And I mean, I'm so much older than you. So for you, this is magnified. The strong sense of self becomes more important because more so than anyone else, all of our relatives are a couple of generations ahead of us, so to speak. And for me, it will be a bit more. I mean, you'll have young years in your life where Gracie will be your closest alive relative, right? These are what people say to me about Jack. Poor Jack, he's not going to have anyone when he's, an older adult. Well, he's going to have a gazillion people, whoever he's with, and his own kids and his family choices and all this. But just the sense of like, I feel lonely sometimes, but I also feel incredibly connected.
It resonates in ways that, like, not many people, it comes in ways that other folks don't resonate with. So I remember when I turned about, I think I was 20, when my parents wanted to start my own life insurance plan. I didn't know too much about it. but I knew that they were making me a beneficiary on theirs, and I was doing the same for them. In case anything happened,
Right.
death was a common conversation in my family. But when I, was putting pen to paper and I was looking at my mom, thinking like, am I gonna lose you too?
Yeah. I
Even
know.
when you're not like always thinking about those things.
No.
And, you know, my dad, his kidney failure and us removing his teeth so he could get dentures and taking away his driver's license, like those were things that I remember that didn't indicate that he was leaving Earth soon, but just some things that we had to pivot and manage differently. It's definitely something that is always on my mind
Right.
back here of how long do I have left to experience life with this person?
Right.
I think about it with you. I think about it with my other siblings, but we're so out of control when it comes to those
Well,
pieces. It's
yeah.
wild. And that's all we want to have is control and to protect the people we love. So it's definitely tricky, but this is going to sound strange, but I'm grateful to have had the experiences that I've had to navigate grief in the way that I do because
Right.
I think that it helps so many other people, and
Right.
I'm grateful to be able to help.
No, I get it. I get it. This is also going to sound weird, but when people pull the age crap on me, like, oh, you're so old, that's not fair to Jack, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, Molly died when she was 13. Should I never have had her? Because
That's
she was going to die when she was 13. Like, my friend Karen lost her mother when her mother was 33. She got murdered. So should her mother never have had kids because she was going to get murdered? Like, as weird as it is, when I worry about dying or losing other people, or, now that Norm is gone, I realize I have one parent now, and she's 82. So she'll be 83 this summer, and she's declining, absolutely. And I can be irritated as hell with her. And then I panic because what if she went home and died? My last moments, I was irritated, like, not that Molly's death can ever bring me comfort, but it just reminds me that ultimately it just doesn't fucking matter. Like, so much of life is just going to happen. So in your moment, be happy when you're happy, be mad when you're mad. Try to go to bed at the end of the day having rectified what you can, but don't walk around carrying remorse and regret that you can't fix because all it does is weigh you down. These are all sort of your typical meme quotes or Hallmark cards. Sometimes I think when you live a life that doesn't fit some little package, you have a much wider lens to see things, like, and you have a much better ability to focus in on something in a way that someone else can't because of the experiences that you're coming from. And as sad as Gracie's life has been for the past almost 9 years, when she gets older and navigates these things, she'll be better for it. She'll be stronger for it. She'll have a wider lens for it. I worry and worry about these things all the time. And as a mother to Gracie, you're like one of my biggest comforts in that regard because she has you, and the you that you are encompasses so much of the weirdness of who I am in terms of our family. You know what I mean? Just all the Gracie doesn't have to adjust her lens at all to look at you as totally normal because, here we are in this sort of extended, wide, combined, recreated, self-defined thing that we call family.
I think that the experiences that we do have and that do impact us, and the ones that we didn't ask for but happen anyway,
Yeah.
shape us for purposes that we have yet to fulfill. Because anyone that tells you life is linear has had a pretty, I want to say, a pretty fair shot with their
Yeah.
upbringing.
No
So
kidding. Oh God.
yeah, try to empathize with us. But
Yeah.
anyways, I think that despite the pain and trauma and grief and shock to one's system, it can, strangely enough, be a gift for their own sake and sanity in addition to someone else's that they're gonna have yet to connect with.
Yeah,
No, it's important.
exactly. Yeah. Wow, Eleanor Rose. We grew up in completely different realities with completely different sets of parents and completely different day-to-day lives. But so much of our internal thought processes and emotional reactions are incredibly similar, which just makes me love DNA and makes me love the universe and the magic of it. So, what I like is when I have a question about myself or a challenge, I have another whole piece of knowledge now in you as my sister for all that we aren't there's so much that we are when it comes to siblings and relatives and that kind of stuff. Any last little tidbit you want anyone to know about the you of you?
I want to show, I don't know where this will fit, but this is just like a good little illustration. I don't know. So there's
Oh,
my
yeah,
mom,
mom.
me, and my dad. So,
He was still had a robustness about him. He was healthy there.
yeah, no, he looked great. He looked
Oh,
good. He was about, I want to say,
88,
90.
yeah, 88 or
Uh,
9. Yeah.
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 It's memories that I look back on that I'm so happy and nostalgic and I yearn for them. And then there's like a mix of, holy cow, young Eleanor was so resilient and
Yeah.
she was able to just navigate so much and get so much that she needed from just ways that she was able to cope in the age that she was. And
Yes.
I just protect her as often as I can
Yeah.
because she's going to be with me forever. And
Yep.
this part of me is going to be with me 30 years from now. So it's just important to protect yourself. Like I mentioned earlier, you're born with yourself and you die
Yeah.
with yourself.
Yes, you
So
do. And
yeah,
really, that's all
just
you can count on at the end of the day. Not because people necessarily let you down, but you just don't know. It's like you have no control.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing I'll say when it just comes to ageism as we wrap up is that Barb and I have our own experiences when it comes to ageism. This isn't me, holding a sign screaming to the top of the world, let age gaps, happen everywhere. It's not something I'm necessarily condoning. It's more about the piece behind where we came from, such product of love that
Right.
happened to have an age gap. Also understanding the level of patience and compassion that one can really provide someone else in a space when they inherently don't understand nor agree with something.
Yes.
And that's beyond ageism, in my opinion.
Yes. What personal experiences inside our parents drew them to one another? Your mom and Tom spent years and years and years together doing amazing things and creating you and creating a life for you that had so much in it. And while my mom's relationship with Tom was different, it was a 15-year chunk of my life, all of my life, that a lot of my life where if it weren't for that connection relationship, I wouldn't be here talking to you on this computer. And I wouldn't be who I am because I was given so many, for all the beliefs that Tom held on to, he was also incredibly talented at opening our eyes, telling us this story and that story and Greek mythology and stories from World War II and stories of his childhood and reading the fairy tales and the books. And he certainly didn't have a list of specific titles and genres and song likes and all focused on one thing. Little did he know, he was teaching us not to be racist. He was teaching us not to be ageist. He was teaching us to be accepting, even if he couldn't evidence those things himself in some of his behaviors, which is just one of the greatest dichotomies of life, I think.
Even at times where I feel the most disconnected from this reality of family that I may have, I remember our idiosyncrasies and our little ticks and the things that we say the same
Yes.
and how we all write with our left hands and how we all have blue eyes and blonde hair at
And
one
melanoma
point.
scars above our knee. All three
Yep.
of us. What the heck?
Yep. So it's just those pieces of connection that still exists beyond the whole fabrication of our perspective of beyond someone.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Talk about radical acceptance, huh?
oh my gosh, yeah. Well, doesn't
Again,
take a day.
t-shirts.
Mhm.
So be good to yourself. So the way that I'm good to myself is by having this wonderful relationship with my sister Eleanor and sharing always, sometimes the things that aren't easy to share, but I'm good to myself by having her in my life. Be good to someone else. So once you've been good to yourself for a bit, look at someone else and maybe spend some time pondering a reality of theirs that you don't understand and giving them grace and love and acceptance in it. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.